Jesus today. Is that good? I haven't done it for years and years, right? Our leaders usually do this, and I haven't done it for years and years. And I just thought, you know what? Maybe it's time I did it. All right, you guys ready? No, there we go. All right. Anybody know where Beaver Lodge is? Besides my kids, because they've been there. It is a little tiny town in northwestern Alberta, just along the BC border. That's where I was born, in the Beaver Lodge Hospital. And I grew up there. My mom and dad were farmers, and so I grew up on a farm. And so I had probably a lot different life than most of you guys have had. I look back and I'm very thankful for my parents and how I grew up. And it wasn't always the best. I certainly wasn't the best kid, but here's where I want to go today with why I follow Jesus. Basically, it's one word: presence. That's the word I want to, and not the gift kind of presence. You guys are like, oh, sweet, this is going to be the best one ever. No, presence as in someone's presence. So I grew up, small town, on a farm. My mom and dad were believers. My dad became a Christian when he was, I believe he was 18, between 18 and 20, I think. And I didn't know his story for a really long time, and found out many years later, actually just a few years ago, well, maybe more than a few, that it was my mom was dragging him to these tent meeting things. And there's this guy speaking, and my dad would get so upset. He didn't understand a thing the guy was saying, and he would be so mad. And he's like, I'm not going back. But he liked my mom, so he went back. And it was during one of those tent meetings that all of a sudden, as my dad is sitting there, he said, it all started making sense. He's just like, all of a sudden, just like that, all of a sudden he understood what was being said, and he just felt compelled to give his life to Jesus, and he did. And yeah, I'm super thankful for that. He was the first in his family. He has, there's 9 of them, so eight brothers and sisters. Yeah, and so came from a completely non-Christian home. My mom, on the other hand, grew up in a Christian home, but her dad became a Christian in the Beaver Lodge Alliance Church. And so if you want to know why I'm a pastor at an Alliance church, it's my grandpa's fault, because he kind of started the whole thing on my mom's side. So he came from non-Christian background as well. And so I had the privilege of growing up with parents who taught me lots about who Jesus is. But mostly, as I look back, the biggest thing that stood out was I could see lots of inconsistencies in their lives, in their theology, and all sorts of things. But what I couldn't get away from was how authentic my mom and dad's relationship with Jesus was. I couldn't get away from it, no matter all of the bad, negative things or excuses, or like, you do this kind of thinking and even saying. I couldn't get away from it, and so I got baptized when I was 17, I believe, 16 or 17, and I was involved in the youth group. Played sports though, so youth group was sporadic, but I went whenever I could. And what happened when I was about, I don't know the exact age, but I was about between 14 and 16. There was a speaker, and we were at a family camp, and something happened that's never happened before. I cannot remember one sermon before the age of 16. Not one. Not one teaching, not one Sunday school lesson, nothing. I cannot remember anything. It just went, right? And so as I was sitting in the, it was this big, massive tent, and I can still smell it. It's like, yeah, it's a weird smell. But it was this big, huge, massive tent, lots and lots of people. And the preacher's name was, it was Reverend Sipley. And he was preaching on 2 Timothy. And he went through the whole book in, I forget how long. I think it was family camp back then. It was like, I don't know, I'm just guessing, maybe 10 days. It seemed like forever as a kid, right? It's like you're there forever. It's awesome. And God did something. I don't know. And to this day, I don't know exactly what it was, but he awakened something in my heart and in like deep. And so if you ever wonder why we do these talks and we go, like, I'm never expecting you guys to remember all the stuff we talk about. That would be impossible, right? But what I am expecting is that the Holy Spirit awakens something in you. And it's the cumulative effect of listening to the Bible teaching and talking about it that has a huge impact on you throughout life. And so that's why we do this. And it's one of the reasons why we do this. And so I'm sitting there in this tent and I'm listening, and I can, like, he was a really good preacher, but there was something more. Like, God was drawing me to himself. I didn't have the words for it back then, but it's really interesting. I can still remember his voice. I can remember some of the things that he said, like, crystal clear. And I was just a kid. I was, this we're talking a long time ago. And so that impacted me huge, and it put a hunger in my heart for God's word. Partly, I think partly because of the way he was preaching it, I just loved it. And I've kind of been addicted to sermons ever since. I've listened to so many sermons. I have my favorite preachers that I listen to, and I really enjoy it. And I think I get that from my dad. My dad does the same thing. And so, but it awakened something in me. And I look back now, and it awakened faith. Like, I knew about God. I knew all the Christian stuff. I was the kid that, I did quizzing. I did all this stuff. I could just stand up and tell you whatever. And it was like, but it was just information. And it was during that camp that something different happened. And God drew me into relationship with him. And so I kind of wanted to start with that story, because that moment has impacted me far more than I ever. And as the years go by, I look back and go like, oh, wow. It was huge. Fast forward a few years, I felt the call to go into ministry full time, like to be a paid person in ministry, a pastor. But there was no way I was going to be a pastor. Like, I just thought that was the worst job ever. It was brutal. Oh, no, second worst job. I knew I wasn't supposed to be a farmer. So I hated farming with a passion. But farming put me through school because I rented land, but it's funny because my two brothers both really loved farming, and they both tried it and failed miserably, like financially. Right? And I did really well, but I never even entertained the thought of ever farming. I just hated it. But the next worst one was being a pastor. But I love the Bible, and I wanted to learn about it and how it's put together. And so I went to Bible college, partly because that's what my brother and sister had done, but partly because I was just interested. And so I did 2 years of Bible college. And in between, I went on a missions experience, which was really interesting because I wasn't part of the team. Somebody dropped out. It was really late in the year, and they asked me, "Do you want to go on a mission?" And I'm like, "I don't know. Okay, what do I have to do?" So everyone else is probably almost done. I can't remember, but I'm sure they were pretty close to their fundraising goals, and I had to fundraise. And so I was like, how do I do that? And so so this is quite a long time ago. Would have been 19. Oh yeah, I turned 20 when I was on this trip. And so I just started praying and just go like, okay, God, if you want me to go, you got to provide for me. I have no clue how in the world I can raise this much cash. I'm a student for a year. I spent all the money in 1 year because Bible college was so expensive because I lived in dorms and paid for the meal plan and all that kind of stuff. And so all my money was gone. And so long story short, in the end, God provided incredible ways. And in fact, even more than I needed, which was just blew me away and taught me like about God's provision. And I had this incredible experience over a summer in Indonesia that was just amazing. And one of the big lessons that I took away from Indonesia was that God can use even me. I guess maybe that's a good way to put it. Because when I went there, and I had still felt the call to ministry, I just thought, how can God use me? Like, this seems impossible. Like, I didn't have any skills except I was an athlete. That's all. I loved sports, and that's basically all I did. I played sports. I was really good at school. Those two things. That was my deal. And so I'm just kind of like, I got nothing. And I don't know, I've probably told this story before, but it's been quite a while. We were out in the middle of Borneo. It was like, so Borneo is in the deep jungle. Like, there's nothing there. There's just huts and indigenous people and our boat, which went down the river a long ways. And so we get to this village, and the missionary's talking to us. His name's Mike, and Mike and Maureen, and they're just telling us about kind of the layout of the land. On the one side, we have animists, they're called. So they believe that everything is God. Rocks, trees, it's everything. And then on the other side of the river was the Muslims. And they had been there, when I got there, they'd been there for, I think it was 10 years. And they had not been over to that side of the river. And Mike said for years and years, he'd just go and he'd wave, right? And they would just, because he wasn't welcome there. They didn't want him there. And he had said just over the last little bit, they had acknowledged his presence. But then they heard that these people from North America were coming. And they're like, they actually approached Mike and asked if we played volleyball. And Mike, of course, had no clue. He didn't even know us. He's like, oh, yeah. Right? And so when we get there, he's like boiling over with excitement. He's like, I can't even go to this side of the river, you guys. You don't understand. I've never even set foot on that side. And so they want to play us in volleyball. And so I'm like, oh, awesome. I played volleyball. I liked volleyball. And my buddy, who was there, played college volleyball and was like 6'4". I'm like, we're going to dominate. And then we had the two girls that were on the team had never played volleyball before in their lives and didn't like sports. So I thought, well, this is going to be really interesting. But what I found out is that they were not the weakest players on our team. It was the missionary, Mike. Oh, it was very, very funny. In fact, it was so funny that when we got over there, I was just shocked because I didn't know what to expect, right? Seriously, we're in the middle of the jungle. Just think of the deepest jungle you can think of and primitive people. And we get over there, we climb up this hill, we go, and Mike's just so excited because he's on this side of the river. And there's this volleyball court with a net, with like official. And I'm like, what? With hard packed sand and bamboo outlines. And I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. This is amazing. And so we get out there and they give us a couple of volleyballs. They're like, oh, these are like nice volleyballs. I'm like, what in the world is going on? And so we're warming up, whatever, and we find out really quickly that Mike cannot even hit the ball. Like, he's like the most uncoordinated person ever. And so we're warming up, whatever, and then we hear a big cheer. And so I'll give you the kind of the layout. There was everything there is off the ground because of the rats. So everything's on poles. So all their houses are sitting on poles, everything, and they have this walkway all around, volleyball courts in the middle. And we hear a big roar, and this line of guys come out in red uniforms, like authentic, like full-on uniforms. I'm like, what? Like court shoes, and we're kind of going like, well, we brought sandals. We didn't know. We thought it would be like beach volleyball kind of thing. And they do a warm-up, and everyone's cheering, and so this whole volleyball match goes on, and we're just in awe. And it actually goes. We decided to play best of three, and so whatever team wins two is the winner, right? And so it actually went to the third game, Now, in the second game, when they were starting to lose, they were starting to fight each other, right? We're just kind of going like, oh, and of course, I'm like a 19, 20-year-old kid going like, oh, this is funny and this is kind of cool. Like, look at those guys. And the missionary is freaking out. He's like, no, you don't understand. If these guys get violent, I don't know what's going to happen. And he was afraid for us. He wasn't afraid as much for himself. I didn't realize it at the time, but because if they got violent, like there's no police. There's no, I mean, these guys do whatever they want. Like we're on their side of the river. And so they finally calmed down. They calmed down and so we continued to play the third game. And it was really close, but in the end they won. And so it was a really cool experience. And one of the things that God taught me through that experience was that he could use me. And it just blew me away that I didn't think I had any skills to offer him. And yet he used athletics of all things that I thought was useless when it comes to faith. He used it to get into the side of the river that hadn't even been walked on by a Christian. And he used volleyball. And it was powerful. And so I was like, wow. And so that's a second experience that really shaped me. Now, we'll fast forward a little bit. After my second year of Bible college, I went to live out on the coast in Vancouver. Lived there for a while, was working, did a job. And it was then that I really started kind of to question faith. It was really weird though. So here's something that I think I grew up with that my dad and my mom and dad did, is that my mom and dad have a heart for lost people, like big time. My dad at 81, 82, 81, I think. He still goes every morning and has breakfast with all the farmers. And he loves those guys. And they make fun of him and Josh, like he's the old guy now, right? But he loves those guys and he wants them to know Jesus. And that heart was transferred to me. I know it was. And I took it with me. And so when I was kind of on this little, whatever you want to call it, trip to the coast to live, I just started kind of going like, I don't know. But whenever I was around my non-Christian friends, because I had a lot, I was the good Christian boy. But when I get with my Christian friends, Christian friends, it wasn't so good. And I just thought, I think the Bible is just there they're just like really like warnings. It's not really that serious. It's that we shouldn't get involved in that, but I think it kind of is exaggerating, right? So that was kind of my thinking at the time. And so I'm like, I'll test this stuff out. So I was there for a time, and then I decided I wanted to get a Bachelor of Science. And so I went to Mount Royal and started a 2-year transfer program with a Bachelor of Science, transfer UC. And it was during those times, living the same way, on my basketball team, and in class, I'm just a good kid. But when I'm not around non-Christians, I'm like wondering about whether this is all true. And yet something in me has always been there that I didn't want it to cause someone else to go like, see that guy? There's no way that God is real because it's the way he lives. Like that was like the thing that shocked, or I don't know, that motivated me, the negative part maybe. I did not want that to happen and did not want to be that guy. And so here's, I said presence was the word that I want to talk about. And here's why. So one of my friends on the basketball team, his mom passed away. And I didn't know what to do. I mean, I'm about 23 at the time. I'm thinking, what do I say to this guy? Like, I felt horrible for him. He's a friend. He's on my basketball team. So finally, I call him, and it was during Christmas break, so I called him from my parents' place, and I didn't know what to say. And I told him that. I'm like, I don't know what to say. I feel awful. Like, Are you okay? Like, if you need to talk, if you need anything, just let me know. It was a fairly short, actually very short conversation. And then that was it, and went back to school in the winter, or in the January semester. And he seeks me out. Of course, we're on the basketball team, so he invites me over to his house, his apartment. And he then tells me how much he hates Christians and Mormons. And I'm going like, I'm a Christian. And he's like, I know. I'm like, what? He's like, but I don't hate you. You're different. And I'm like, I don't understand. Like, how can you hate Christians? I am a Christian. He's like, no, there's something different about you. And I'm going like, I have no clue what he's talking about, because I don't think I'm any different. I know in my heart that I am a broken, fallen person, that I'm struggling with sin in every which way, and I'm not sure about God. And this guy says he already knew that I was a Christian. But then he went on to say, he said, he thanked me for calling him. He said, you're the only, other than the coach, you're the only guy that called me on the whole team. None of the Mormons did, he said, because I played with a whole bunch of the Mormons. So that was why he hated Mormons. And I don't know why he hated Christians. I don't remember. He told me, but I don't remember. And I was like, seriously? He's like, yeah. And he said, I know it wasn't a lot. He said, but that meant the world to me. That one of my teammates actually cared enough to call. And I was freaked out about calling him. I didn't know what to say. I was so worried and all this stuff that I was going to offend him or say something stupid, and all that mattered was that I called him. And somehow, I don't know how exactly this all works. Somehow that guy knew about God's presence in my life, and I didn't see it. And I didn't even know. Now I think I talked about this. I did actually talk about this last week in the question, texting your question. Another experience at Mount Run, another of my friends on the basketball team was with me in all the biology classes. And so we were in evolution, and so like there's a whole big, huge section on it, right? And so I do my work, I'm doing my best. I want to learn this stuff. I want to learn why people believe this, right? And so I'm delving into it. I'm studying it. Because I got to write exams, I got to do all that stuff. And at one point during that semester, we were at his place. I don't know what we're doing. But he just looked at me and he said, like, maybe we're studying for it. Cause he's like, you don't buy this stuff, do you? And I was like, what? You don't buy this stuff. And I'm like, well, how do you know that? Like, I'm trying to do my best. Like, I'm studying. He's like, I don't know. He said, you don't buy it. And I'm like, yeah, no, I don't. And then he asked me why. And so I told him why. I'm Christian. He's like, yeah, I know. What? But I have this huge conversation with him. And so he was just curious. And it was like, oh, wow, okay. This is crazy. Like, God's presence in my life again at the same time. There's so many stories like this, you guys, throughout my time that I look back now. I had no clue at the time. I can pinpoint it. Like, there's so many times this happened to me. And so anyway, we had this big discussion and we got into the origins. For me, it came down to, where did it all begin? And so, and for those of you who were last week, I know you've heard this just recently. But he's just like, well, how did the Big Bang happen? Like, where'd the particles come from? Like, he's like, oh, it came from a star. I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense. Well, where did the star come from? Right? He's like, oh, it came from another star. I'm like, okay, well, where did that star come from? Well, it came from another star. Seriously, I don't know how long we did this. I just, in my memory, it was like, this is going way too long. Like, there should be something going on, until he finally was like, he stopped. He's just like, you're just going to keep saying that, right? I'm like, yeah, because if we're going to talk about origin, we have to start where these particles came from that made the first star. There has to be a first star. He's like, well, no, I just think the stars were eternal or whatever. So I was kind of like, oh, okay. But for me, in the end, it was just kind of like, that's where it landed. Like, how did this all begin? And so and we talked about this last week, but how the Bible talks about creation and how it all got started, and that it's evident. Creation is actually evidence of God himself. Like, And a whole chapter or part of a chapter in the Bible dedicated to why we push that away when we don't want God in our lives. And so that was that conversation. Again, there's actually quite a few different basketball stories about this, and it wasn't anything that, like, I was trying to live under the radar, right? It's not that I wasn't trying to be a Christian. I was just trying to, I didn't want to offend these guys. I wanted to fit in, kind of thing. I wanted to play ball, and you got to be a team. It was just, there was something about me that they saw. They thought it was me, but it wasn't. It was God's presence in my life. So fast forward many years, I'm working in an oil refinery. I've finished seminary, and I'm looking for a job in Regina. And I get the job in the parts division in a oil refinery. And so I'd been there for, I don't know, maybe a month, 2 months, and I'm working with this guy, and we're working away. I don't know what we're talking about. All of a sudden he just stops, and he's just like, "There's something different about you." I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Like, I don't know. Like, my immediate thought is like, I've done something horrible to somebody, right? I'm just like, what did I do? This is like, but again, it all comes down to he's noticing something and he can't put his finger on it. He thinks it's me, but he knows it's not, and yet it can't be anything else. And so we start in this whole conversation. And again, it was this shock that I did not know that God's presence in my life was making a difference there. So another job, I was working construction, and I was pretty young at the time. And this older guy I was working with, same thing. After working with each other for a couple of months, comes and starts asking me relationship advice. And I didn't even have a girlfriend, right? I never even had dated anybody at that time. And I'm just kind of like, what? And why are you coming to me? I'm like, and he's like, because you're different. And I'm like, oh no, what in the world? Again, I have no idea. I'm just doing my job, working hard. And I don't know how these guys are figuring this stuff out. And so, and it's, I don't want you to get the wrong impression that I was trying to hide my faith. I never did. I just tried to live my life, and, I loved God, and away we went. And so that's the same thing he said. I came to you because, and there was a situation that happened, and he just saw the way that I handled it, which is really weird because I usually handle things horribly. But he saw something in it and came to me, and I was just like, I told him, it's Jesus, man. There's nothing else. I can't give you an explanation. So I've been telling you all these stories. Why do I follow Jesus today? Because of God's presence in my life. I can't deny it. It has been amazing. And there's so many more stories. I look back and I'm just going like, I don't know how people knew. I could not see it. And yet the people around me did. And it wasn't because I was so holy, or it wasn't because I was anti this, or I was like, or they knew I went to church. Like, it wasn't any of that stuff. There was something about God's presence in my life that made me stand out and got them in the spot where they approached me on it and asked me questions. And so, and that's not the only thing that happened. I just wanted to choose that kind of path for you guys today with why I follow Jesus. There's lots of times where I just was telling people about Jesus. So of course they knew. But these specific examples, I just wanted to tell you, I didn't do any of that pre-stuff. It was just, they noticed God's presence in my life. And so there's a story in Exodus, and I've told this story numerous times, but I just love it because it always reminds me of how important God's presence is in my life and in the life of believers, because that's the difference, you guys. So it's Moses, and Moses and God are having this conversation, and you're like, what? Moses and God having? Yeah, this is like, it's wacky, it's awesome. And so they're having this conversation. God's like, I'm not going in with you guys. I'm sending you into the promised land, this land that God had promised Israel. I'm going to send you in. I'll send an angel, and you can take care of it with the angel. And it's like, oh, interesting, because as the reader, you're just kind of reading through it. It's just the story, right? And I'm like, oh. And God does say some pretty hard things there about people that are grumbling and complaining. But it's Moses' reply that
sticks with me, and I think always will. How will the other nations tell us apart from them unless your presence goes with us? And then he says, if you don't go, I'm not going. To me, that is one of the most significant moments, I think, in history, where it shows how important God's presence is in our lives. And so, you guys, my appeal to you, why I follow Jesus, is because of his presence in my life, and I don't even realize it most of the time. You know, when I'm conscious about it and I'm praying or I'm talking to God or whatever, or right now when I'm preaching or telling a story, I'm aware of it. But like all of those other times when I'm just not aware of it, it's happened during hockey games. Like, okay, I got to tell you this one. Right in the middle of a game, this guy, we're playing a tournament and we're short. We only have like 2 or 3 subs. It was exhausting. Of course, I was younger then, so it didn't matter. Couldn't imagine doing it now. But him and I are on the bench, and he looks at me, and he's like, because they know, like a few of them knew I was a pastor, and this guy knew I was, because I did his wedding. But he looked at me and he's like, you haven't always been like this, have you? I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, like the pastor and, the Jesus stuff. And I was just kind of like, what? And I'm just like, I had a 2-minute moment there where I got to tell him about Jesus. Like, it's like, whoa, did that ever happen fast? And it was between shifts, and then we were out again. And so, as it was actually after that, he asked me to be his, to do his wedding, by the way. But anyway, so that's another thing. But, and I've had numerous, again, another guy, he was a police officer, RCMP, was playing with him. And again, had no clue. This guy's just asking me some questions. And I'm like, why is he asking me these questions? Of course, he found out I was a pastor. So his first question is about alcohol. And the next question was homosexuality. And then there was a third question. And I got to know this guy. And, okay, so we're defense partners at the time. And he's asking me on the ice, like during face-offs. He's asking me questions. I'm like, aren't we supposed to be playing this game? But what happens is I find out later specific questions he asked was to find out whether I was trustworthy. And that guy spilled his life to me. And then he's like, he picked me up. He invited me to play in an Indigenous tournament with him. So I'm like, okay. So I went, because I actually used to do that. And he pulls up and he picks me up and we're driving away. And he looks at me and he says, I want what you got. I'm like, it's a cop, right? I'm like, what? Uh-oh. Well, what did I just get myself into? He's like, no. He's like, I see your family. I see you. He says, you have something and I want it. And again, it wasn't me. Like, I'm just kind of like, what is going on? I can't stop telling these stories because it's not me. It's Jesus. I'm a train wreck. Seriously. I have ADHD. I have all of these different things going on. There's no way God should have used me as a pastor. Like, I'm telling you right now, like that's crazy talk. The only reason that this has been effective, or that I couldn't even speak in front of people to begin with, but the only reason is because of Jesus. He's done it all. And why? Because God chooses unlikely people. And why is because it brings him glory. My weaknesses, all my weaknesses, right? Display. There's no way that this guy should be successful, and yet Jesus has done it. He did it all. And so I see his presence in my life and the difference it's made, and it's unbelievable. And so as I look at my life, I tried not to be a pastor. I tried everything. I ran away so hard. And in the end, I surrendered to God. I said, okay, I want to do something in the science realm. And God was like, I had no clue that he was preparing me for this through my science degree. But he was. All of those things were preparing me for what he has for me today, and he's preparing me today for what he has for me tomorrow. And so it's because of his presence in my life, and it's made all the difference. And so that's my appeal to you. It's about God's presence. What you're known for, number one, should be God's presence in your life, that there's something they can't pinpoint. Now, there'll be times when you can't, or you have to say no to stuff, or like, I don't agree or whatever, that's fine. But the number one way that people know is because of God's presence in your life, because it changes things. And there's a story in John, I just want to end with this, where Jesus has just done some tough teaching, and lots of the disciples leave. Like they're like, that's too much, we're out. It says Jesus turned to the 12, and he's like, how about you? You guys gonna leave me too? And Peter looks at him and says, you have the words of life. Where else could we possibly go? That's what Jesus has. And that's what I think about. I think about all my neighbors. I think about all the people around us that don't know Jesus. And that's how I feel. I'm like, man, what they really need is they need Jesus in their lives. Like, he changes everything. His presence in my life has been the most amazing thing ever. And my life isn't that great, right? I'm not like anything to write home about. And yet God's just going like, shh. He's taking care of me in so many different situations. I've experienced his love. I've experienced his presence. And I'm like, why? And then every morning, because I don't have to follow Jesus. I could just abandon everything. Right? Nobody's holding the gun to my head going like, you have to follow Jesus. But I those words from Peter resound in my mind. Where else would I go? You have the very words of life. So that's why I follow Jesus today. It's his presence in my life, and I want it to continue. And I want to, unwittingly still affect people with God's presence wherever I go, because when God's presence is with you, wherever you go, his presence is in the darkest places, work, school, anywhere. His presence is there because his presence is in you, with you. And that makes all the difference.